Yeah. Yeah.
Alright, first, Waitrose, will you please get your act together? This packaging is utterly ridiculous. So, you want to charge us £30 a kilo and then put it in this piece of plastic that I cannot open. It took me a good 2 or 3 minutes now, maybe that's my fault. But on the other hand, the whole presentation of this premium, wonderful piece of beef is utterly ridiculous. Now, not only does it look like I could have cut this Cote de Boeuf, there are bits hanging off, bits of fat and gristle, and you can tell the knife work is awful. It's then put in that plastic, which I cannot even open. On the other hand, with my butcher, it's wonderfully presented in a sort of old-fashioned piece of butcher's paper, and it's beautifully cut, of course. But then that's the difference that you might expect from, a master butcher and someone at Waitrose who may not have a lot of training. But anyway, that's not necessarily the important part of this. The important part is that we are today cooking my favourite cut of beef, the Cote de Boeuf. Now, this is ultimately a French terminology. I think in the US you might call it cowboy steak. It's a ribeye with the bone in, and a bit more of the fat. It hasn't been trimmed down, and it's generally large, and it has that awesome look to it. But it's also just a really interesting thing to cook because there are various ways of doing it, from sous vide and reverse sear. Reverse sear works really well with this, to just completely blasting it on the barbecue, because the fat that it has will protect it, and the thickness that it has. You've got so many options with it, and when you do bring it to the table and slice it up, honestly, it wows everyone. And when it comes to flavour, generally it is just packed with absolutely wonderful flavour. I mean, you can see the marbling here in this one. This is a Hereford breed. This is the Waitrose one. It's had about 30 days of aging. I mean, it's marbled throughout. It's got wonderful pockets of fat. On the other hand, it does look a bit like a dog's dinner. I mean, I could probably pull the bone out of there if I tried a little bit. But here, look at the butcher's one. I think it's been trimmed much more nicely. There's a big piece of bone sticking out at the top. So altogether, that is presented better. Both pieces here are around the 500 gram mark. I think they were within 100 grams of each other, and I really wouldn't go too much smaller than that, because you can see the thickness you get here is really what you want. So anything from 350 grams upwards is fine, but up to about a kilo is perfect. Once you get beyond that, you're really looking at roasting something much more than sort of cooking it as a steak. Now, these take plenty of salt because obviously, if you think about the surface area on the outside compared to when you slice it, obviously it's going to need plenty of flavour. And trust me, this much salt was not too much. This was actually just about right. So it's almost like a crust of salt. Now, get your barbecue hot, but not too hot. And what I mean by that, it's not very specific, sorry, is don't have the flame too close to the actual grill. The flame, or the coals on mine, are a good 10 inches below. They're pretty hot. This was around 350 Celsius when you close the lid and let it warm up. So it wasn't hot enough for it to start burning or really strongly sizzling straight away. That first few minutes, it's slowly rendering the fat on the outside and just gently starting to cook. So bear in mind that these took about 20 minutes to cook. The slightly fatter one, which was from Waitrose, I gave it an extra 2 minutes. And at no point was there any really strong searing. This sort of crust that forms gently around the outside from this amount of flame is perfect. So the flames are really just licking it, they're not enveloping it. And I didn't worry about burning at all. So I would close the lid for a few minutes, open it, turn them over, and as I said, it took about 20 minutes. And after that, I gave a good 10 minutes of resting. Anyway, I will see you in a minute after these are cooked. Hi guys, James here again from The Meat, so thank you for coming to watch. So I went down to Waitrose, picked this one up and got this from the local butcher. Now, I normally use this knife, which is, you know, pretty big in itself, but today I wanted to introduce you to the new chopping cleaver, machete. It's the beast, it's huge. I don't think it'll be very good for slicing anything finely, but what we can do is get it in here and use it to cut. So I'm gonna cut this straight down the middle and let's see how this looks. Okay, there we go. We have got a good medium going on there. And let's cut this one open. All right, they look very similarly cooked, and the point of this test is just to see whether, in a moment, in a blind test, what do I think of the two? The Waitrose one is a very tiny bit cheaper, just under 10% cheaper. They both had 30 days of aging. This is a Hereford, and this is a Devon Ruby, so two different breeds. This one is not very expertly butchered. I guess they don't have master butchers working at Waitrose, which is fair enough. So, I'm just going to slice a little bit, and then my wife, who's off camera, is going to help. So, okay, got a few little pieces there. I've got to say, they both smell incredible. You could definitely tell by looking at them that they had a decent amount of aging, which will make them really tender and full of flavour. Okay, the pieces look very similar to each other. They're both really juicy. Let's get on with it. I'm just going to look away for a second while my wife feeds me some beef. That's something that makes me happy. All right. Thank you. Okay. Okay, well, let me just say I would be happy with either, but for me there was one that I did prefer slightly to the other. They're both really juicy. You have to put a fair amount of seasoning on such a large piece of beef, so they're really well seasoned. There was a difference in texture. Now I found the first one to be more tender and really, really flavourful. Maybe the second one, which was slightly less tender, had a tiny bit more depth of flavour. So they were slightly different. First one was more tender, second one had a tiny bit more flavour. So I don't know which one was which though, so let's find out. What was the first one? This one. Okay, so number one was the really big, thick piece from Waitrose. Now, that was definitely more tender. It really just melted and fell apart. Actually, it was fantastic. So this one, it doesn't surprise me that this has a bit more flavour. It's probably got more aging because they will have a big factory system and in a big abattoir for hanging and aging these, and it will be all very automated, I imagine. Whereas here, the butcher puts it in there, he aims for 30 days, but it could easily be 40 or even way more. On top of that, and this is something I say all the time, the thicker the piece, generally, if they're both cooked to the same, the thicker piece will feel more tender. It's just a natural thing that happens, but all I could say is both incredibly enjoyable. I was a bit skeptical about this one because of the way it looked, but I would really happily get that, and I think anyone would be happy to eat that. So all in all, I'm a little bit surprised. I thought the butcher's one would just be way better in every respect, and although it had more depth of flavour, I think a lot of people would just love how tender this one was and how much it melted. So that's all I can say really is I'd happily go out and buy the Waitrose one, and I think you'd enjoy it. So I hope you enjoyed that little test. This is just a very small little video, and if you enjoy this sort of content, please subscribe and give this video a thumbs up, and we'll see you next week. Cheers.